morning. My name is Bokushu, and it's great to be here with you on this retreat, the Voice of Wisdom retreat. And during this retreat, have you seen the mountains walking? Have you seen their shadows on the driveway, outside, on the grass, on the clapboard, on the parking lot, rocks in their shoes, rocks in their heads, gaining rocks, losing rocks, coming and going at all hours of the day? And have you seen the mountains flowing? Have you seen their shadows mingling and separating, seemingly, and then recombining, shadows upon shadows, deeper and deeper, the mountains higher and higher, more and more still? Have you tasted the wisdom dressing? I've been having quite a lot of it, and I'm hoping it's working. We'll find out soon enough. So we've been having some wonderful Dharma talks this week, starting with Miyoko, who took us to Alaska, and we saw the complete image of a moose right here. And then we heard from Rio, who took us to the heart of Dogen Central Headquarters. And then Sesshin took us to France. And the anguish that over-policing and mis-policing has caused in that country, with its legacy of colonialism, not at all different from this country, really. A different language, with the same words. So after these wonderful talks, surely you understand the Mountains and Waters Sutra. But if you don't understand, and you say that, why do you say it as if it were a bad thing? Why is it a problem to not understand the Mountains and Waters Sutra? What is your understanding of understanding? What can this need to understand tell us about ourselves, and in particular about our emotional life? Rather than try to understand Dogen, ask yourself as you read him, how do I feel? Do you feel confused? What's wrong with that feeling? Do you feel lost? What is wrong with that feeling? It's just that these are uncomfortable feelings. But what is wrong with uncomfortable feelings? What did you come here for, if not for uncomfortable feelings? Uncomfortable decor. And so on. I think it's really important to consider the possibility that Dogen is really actively working to give us an experience with his words, an experience that is beyond words through words, an experience of, I don't want to use the word enlightenment, but realization, I think, is a better word. Can we realize ourselves through these words, through the midst of our very discomfort with these words? But for those of you who remain addicted to the notion that you might understand Dogen. Perhaps we can get into his head a bit. And to do that, I would like to take us back in time to sometime around 400 years before the Mountains and Waters Sutra was written. And at that time, a very famous poem was composed, and it goes this way. Just avoid seeking from others, or you will be far estranged from yourself. Solitary now am I, and independent, but I meet him everywhere. He is now no other than myself, but I am now not him. It must be understood in this way in order to merge directly with suchness. It's a strange coincidence, but in this very building 15 years ago in our open Sozan, that I think what was my first retreat with this community, I said, I am estranged from myself. And I had never heard of the author of this poem, Dongshan Liangje, although I had chanted his name repeatedly during that session. So I don't know why I chose those words, but in my case it was different than I think it was for Dongshan. He starts his poem, just avoid seeking from others. And in my case it was really the contrary. I was convinced it was all here, that I had all the answers, that I was the expert. This is the product of deep insecurity, which translates into a lot of defensiveness and a need for control and perfectionism. Have you noticed any perfectionistic tendencies? Yeah. Consider for a moment if you have any of these qualities in you. Do you recognize yourself in my description of myself? Does it make you uncomfortable? Do you understand? How do you understand yourself? That's the most important thing. And under this perfectionism, my feelings were buried and unrecognized. I certainly had them, although I couldn't recognize them or name them. And I labored long and pointlessly to hide my obvious vulnerability. But to everyone else, I was completely exposed. I think it's fair to say that, like me, most of you have your own forms of damage and your own coping mechanisms for that damage. So many of us come to this practice seeking to change. But in my experience, what is actually called for is something much closer to integration than the exiling of unloved behavioral tendencies and traits. Can we heal the broken parts of ourselves by drawing them even nearer, shining the light on them and embracing them? And above all, learning to laugh at them a bit, quite gently, quite indulgently, and quite frequently. So going back to Dongshan's poem, at its core we hear these lines. He is now none other than myself, but I am not now him. It seems quite like a paradox, doesn't it? How can that be? He is now no other than myself, but I am now not him. I don't want to spoil anything for you by talking in too much detail about those words, but I urge you to consider them as we chant them We'll chant them tomorrow, I think. When we chant the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness, which was purportedly written by Dogen, although that is disputed by scholars, so we don't really know. Might have been written by his teacher or someone else. In the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness, you may remember the line, "You are not it. It is actually you." I think we can draw a direct line between that and "He is now none other than myself, but I am not now him." And we can draw a direct through line between these lines and Dogen's Mountains and Waters Sutra. Here's part 20. It is not only that there is water in the world, but there is a world in water. It is not just in water. There is also a world of sentient beings in clouds. There is a world of sentient beings in the air. There is a world of sentient beings in fire. There is a world of sentient beings on earth. There is a world of sentient beings in the phenomenal world. There is a world of sentient beings in a blade of grass. There is a world of sentient beings in one staff. Wherever there is a world of sentient beings, there is a world of Buddha ancestors. You should thoroughly examine the meaning of this. Part 4. Green mountains are neither sentient nor insentient. You are neither sentient nor insentient. So what is all this business about sentient and insentient beings and Buddha ancestors? Well, it connects directly back to Dogen, but before I get to that, there is a direction here that I think is, in my opinion, important to recognize, that Dogen was trying to build a lineage, and he was extremely well versed in Zen literature. So his project at this time and in this writing was to create the Soto school. This is the Soto school being born, the school that we are practicing in through these words. And they're directly tied to the ancestors, and most particularly, in my opinion, Dogen. In the Mountains and Water Sutra, he repeatedly invokes the Buddha ancestors. Part 3. The Buddha ancestors' words point to walking. This is fundamental understanding. Part 10. You should know that eastern mountains traveling on waters is the bones and marrow of the Buddha ancestors. Part 14. Where Buddha ancestors reach, water never fails to appear. Because of this, Buddha ancestors always take up water and make it their body and mind, make it their thought. Part 6. Because mountains are Buddha ancestors appear in this way. Even if you see mountains as grass, trees, earth, rocks, or walls, do not take this seriously or worry about it. It is not complete realization. And at the end of this passage he writes, these are conditioned views. This is not the understanding of the Buddha ancestors, but just looking through a bamboo tube at the corner of the sky. So, if these are not the understanding or views of the Buddha ancestors, what are or is the understanding of the Buddha ancestors? 13 generations before Dogen, when Dogen was a young monk, he had a pivotal interview with a teacher named Kuei-shan. It's a bit long, but I need to read it because I think that without this interview, Dogen would not have been Dogen. Dogen would not have been Dogen, and we might not be here today. A monk asked national teacher Wei Chung, what sort of thing is the mind of the ancient Buddhas? It's an interesting question, isn't it? What sort of thing? It's like it's a box out there, or a star, or a tree, or a rock. If you could just get his hands around it, there would be some miraculous discovery. The national teacher replied, it's wall and tile rubble. So immediately he deflates this idea of some wondrous thing out there that's separate from the monk, that if he could only get his hands on it, could change his life, change his viewpoint on everything. And this is really the way, I think, to teach, is to scramble the brains of anyone who asks such questions. Wall and tile rubble, isn't that something non-sentient? Asked the monk. It is, replied the national teacher. And I just want to pause here to say, he's freaking out about this whole thing that it's a non-sentient thing. But doesn't our Heart Sutra say, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind? Why do you think that's in there? Here we are chanting it. There's a story about Dogen when he was a kid. He was studying with a teacher, and he read this Heart Sutra, and he said to the teacher, I've got a nose, I've got eyes, ears, tongue, etc. Why does the sutra say I don't have them? And the teacher said, I am not your teacher, you have to go to someone else. He was recognized as exceptional. So again, we see these connections of the ancestors, whether it's Dogen or Dongshan, directly referencing core teachings in our lineage. So the monk continues, and yet it can expound the Dharma? It is constantly expounding it, radiantly expounding it without ceasing, replied the national teacher. The monk asked, then why haven't I heard it? The national teacher said, you yourself haven't heard it, but this can't hinder those who are able to hear it. What sort of person acquires such hearing? Asked the monk. All the sages have acquired such hearing, replied the national teacher. The monk asked, can you hear it, Ho-Shang? No, I can't, replied the national teacher. The monk said, if you haven't heard it, how do you know that non-sentient beings expound the Dharma? This is a really gifted and tenacious monk. And he's really giving this teacher a run for his money. This is just the wonder of what we're doing here. The national teacher said, fortunately, I haven't heard it. If I had, I would be the same as the sages, and you, therefore, would not hear the Dharma that I teach. In that case, ordinary people would have no part in it, said the monk. I teach for ordinary people, not sages, said the national teacher. What happens after ordinary people hear you? Asked the monk. They are no longer ordinary people, said the national teacher. The monk asked, according to which sutra does it say that non-sentient beings expound the Dharma? Clearly you shouldn't suggest that it's not part of the sutras. Haven't you seen it in the Avatamsaka Sutra? It says, the earth expounds the Dharma, living beings expound it, throughout the 3 times everything expounds it. Again, another core teaching. It's just one long through line that they keep referencing, back and forth like a ping pong game. The master thus completed his narration. So here the master is Dongshan. He's recounting this to Kuei-shan. Kuei-shan said, that teaching also exists here. However, one seldom encounters someone capable of understanding it. Dongshan said, I still don't understand it clearly. Would the master please comment? Kuei-shan raised his fly whisk, saying, do you understand? "No, I don't. Please, Hoshang, explain," replied Dongshan. Kuei-shan said, "It can never be explained to you by means of the mouth of one born of father and mother." So Dongshan then inquired as to who he could learn this secret from, and Kuei-shan referred him to his teacher Yunyan. So he went and studied with Yunyan, and there he penetrated this mystery that he'd been working on for a while. And he wrote a verse, "How amazing, how amazing. Hard to comprehend that non-sentient beings expound the Dharma. It simply cannot be heard with the ear. It must, but when the sound is heard with the eye, then it is understood." So, again, it's all this completely unexpected stuff. It's not what we expect. It's not somewhere else. It's not something great and wondrous beyond our grasp. It's opening to what's right here and allowing it to teach us, to come to us, using our eyes to hear the crows, using our ears to watch our shadows lengthening on the driveway. Later, Dongshan asked this same question of another teacher. Then the master asked, "What sort of thing is the mind of the ancient Buddhas?" Xingping said, "It is your very mind." Dongshan said, "Although that's so, it's still a problem for me." Xingping said, "If that's the way it is, you should go ask a wooden man." The master said, "I have a single sentence with which to express it, and I don't rely on the words of the sages." Xingping said, "Why don't you go ahead and say it?" The master said, "It's none of my affair." Interesting, isn't it? The mind of the ancient Buddhas. Dongshan, ancient Buddha, says that the mind of the ancient Buddhas is none of his affair. He is now none other than me, but I am not now him. So, leaving aside all of this, there was a story in Dongshan's biography that affected me very powerfully. Once he was very established as a teacher. His mother was living in destitution, wandering with beggars. And finally she came to him to try to see him. But Dongshan, so here's what it says in the record of Dongshan. She yearned to go and see him, but Dongshan avoided her, barring the entrance to his room. Consequently, his mother died of grief outside his room. I read this not long after my own mother died. I had a lot of trouble with it. The story continues. Not long after, she told Dongshan in a dream, "Because you firmly maintained your resolve and did not meet me, I severed the delusive feelings of love and attachment. As a result of the power of these good roots, I was reborn in the realm of the satisfied celestials." So she's drinking a lot of red zinger. Is that what it's about? The delusive feelings of love and attachment. As somebody who has fought against the feelings of love and attachment, I can tell you, it ain't good roots to fight against the feelings of love and attachment. And if that makes me not the proper heir of Dongshan, well, so be it. I guess it depends really where you're coming from. If you're coming from a place where love and attachment is something you avoid because you're too insecure, then get into love and attachment somehow. And if you're all lovey-dovey all the time and can't stop slobbering on other people, well, get in your head a little bit. It's really like that. We move away from whatever extreme we like. and we find more balance, more options, more potential to reduce suffering. Dongshan's mother thanked him for not taking care of her. My mother, that I recall, did not thank me for taking care of her. Although admittedly my care was not exactly exemplary, but I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd handled matters like Dongshan did. We held a memorial for my mother 5 years ago to the day, yesterday, at our last ongo at the Grail. We had an Oban ceremony that day. She was impeccable in her timing. Roshi and I and Dogen, possibly Fusho, scattered her ashes in the stream. There had been a lot of... There we go. And where is she now? Dongshan took a handful of rice that his mother had collected as a beggar and mixed it in with the community's rice as a funerary offering to aid her on her journey. I must admit, I took a tiny pinch of her ashes and put them in the koro. Tiny pinch. No food was involved, don't worry. And I didn't know this story. I didn't know anything about Dongshan's life. I just followed what he did, and yet I could not do what he did. Each of us must forge our own path. We are uniquely responsible for our own practice. If there is such a thing as a teacher, this is a person who removes rocks and rubbish from your path, so that genius and learning may progress unimpeded toward whatever awaits it. Keizan Jokin, who wrote the biography of Dongshan and all of our other ancestors, who we'll be chanting very shortly, wrote this poem in honor of Dongshan's relationship with his mother. Extremely fine, subtle consciousness is not emotional attachment. It constantly makes that one preach keenly. There's a limit to keen preaching, in my opinion. I'd like to leave you with a poem, You Mountains and Waters. It was written by Hanshan. Clambering up the cold mountain path, the cold mountain trail goes on and on. The long gorge, choked with scree and boulders. The wide creek, the mist-blurred grass. The moss is slippery, though there's been no rain. The pine sings, but there's no wind. Who can leap the world's ties and sit with me among the white clouds?